I'd like to call our January 30th, 2025 Roanoke County School Board Budget Work Session to order. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Item 2.01, 2024-2025 Budget Updates, Ms. Susan Peterson.
Madam Chair, members of the board. I'd like to start off with the current year budget update, taking a quick little dive into our revenue and our expenditures. Sorry about that. Look, I turned everything off except my watch, so I apologize. So we'll go ahead and get started. In our revenue update, we'll take a quick look at enrollment, and then we'll look at how that rolls through into the governor's caboose budget. So in this slide, what you'll see when we projected our enrollment for the current year, we used 13,336 when we ran the numbers through VDOE's calc tool. Right now, when we receive the caboose budget, so the caboose budget is when he sends the calc tool for the current year. At the same time, he sends the information for the future year, and you can look kind of backwards to see how the current year is operating, where our money is going to stand. And so in the calc tool, the VDOE used 13,288 as an estimate for what they expect our ADM to be when we get to the end of the year. They did update this based off last year's ADM and off of our fall enrollment numbers. Like I said, we did budget the big middle number. And then on the right-hand side, we received our fall funded numbers, and our fall funded membership was 13,293. Historically, 99.83% of what the fall funded number ends up being where we land with ADM. And so based off that math, it looks like we may land the year with 13,270. That is a 66 student difference, and it is significant.
Susan, how much is each student?
$8,483.61.
Always went up over the years.
The next slide.
It used to be closer to 5,000 back in the day.
Right.
You know?
The governor has put a lot more funding towards K-12 in the past several years, and so the per pupil amount has risen more recently. So when we run this through the calc tool, the new numbers, so the first column is the 2025 budget. That's what we started the year budgeting as and what we expected to receive. I've got the four main funds shown as the different rows. The next column shows the caboose budget, where we estimate 13,270 ADM. And then the last column shows our differential. So in the general fund, we do look to possibly be sitting about 560,000 short in our general fund revenue. This is not a small amount. We do the best that we can when we estimate ADM. We're estimating it, a year and a couple months before March ADM comes out for that year, and we're hoping that the trends were going to be a little bit better. We use sound techniques when we do try to do this, and it just is unfortunate that we are having a loss of students. Any questions?
Yes, what would be do you have our last 5 years of increase, decrease based off the ADM changes?
Just the pure ADM?
Yeah.
That's in the next presentation.
Okay.
So
Next.
can you wait until we?
When she gets into the presentation for next year's budget, she'll show the trend.
Okay.
Yeah. And you all, I know you know this. We do this every year, but projecting that ADM is crucial because, and typically we wind up having more students than we budget on, which helps us because we don't have a situation like this. The reason you don't want to go too low in your budget in terms of saying, well, let's be real conservative and just guess it real low so that we don't find ourselves with a shortfall, is you're leaving money on the table, because that's money that if you project it more closely, you could have put into, raises for teachers and so forth. So it's, something you want to, estimate as close as you can, but, when it comes in lower than what you budgeted on, then we find ourselves with a shortfall. So it's just,
Do we know what the anomaly is this year as opposed to the last several years, where it's 66 less? I mean,
like, why did it go down by 66 students?
I mean, just, yeah, I mean, do we have a?
Well, I think all the reasons that, I guess it's all in the demographic study in terms of, I think that they said, single-family housing plays into it and that kind of thing in the county. That's the biggest thing I heard, but they said our capture rate's good as far as the kids, the families that we have, but, I don't think there's any one thing showing the why it's
So
not
this
going
year's
down.
this year's just different than the last 4 or 5, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, well, we just, the number we chose, which was in the middle, it played out closer to what I guess the VDOE number was versus the Weldon Cooper number. Weldon Cooper is always high, VDOE is always low. We kind of hit in the middle, and this time it was a little closer to the VDOE number.
We use grade progression though, right?
We do.
Right.
That's what I thought. Okay.
And usually the grade progression is
Thank you.
pretty close to what it should be. I will say there are general trends just across the U.S. of lower birth rates. I think that plays into it a little bit.
Yeah, 2007 was that special year for some reason where they saw a precipitous drop in birth rate.
And going forward, we do continue to see trending downwards. So it's not like this is a blip down and next year we're going to be up. Next year we are going to be down again as well. But we'll get to that in the next section. So that's all I have for the revenue update for this year. I will like to take a look at kind of 3 high dollar possible just things to watch for, if you will, on the expenditure side. So first we'll start with a PTO sick leave payout. This is a change in our policy from last year that had some great purposes, to try and plan when folks are going to be out of their classroom so that we can have higher fill rates, and we've definitely accomplished that. Our fill rates this year are much higher than they were in the past. Our percent of budget, we are at 62% of budget for the substitute, so we do have, we're using them, but we are filling them, and so that's why we're using more of them. So this chart shows when folks are able to cash out for the first time either their PTO balances or their sick leave. And it depends on how many days they have accrued. Then they have a certain number of payout days that they can get paid out. They get paid out at 20% of their daily rate with a minimum payout of $45. The information provided me from Mr. Bradshaw, they have estimated, I've got 3 different kind of scenarios. The absolute worst scenario, it's only going to get better from here, is the far left column in all purple. And that is estimating that everybody will cash out all days. So that's kind of worst case scenario. So we're not going to be at 687 because people are using days between now and the end of the year. But that is today, that will be our liability. We have a medium level kind of liability where the folks in the green would be paid out, estimated about 80% would choose to be paid out all their days. And then the folks in the brown are those that don't tend to use their days as much, and so we're estimating about 20% of those folks will get paid out, right? And then the minimal liability, the purple, we estimate that about 50% of those. So like I said, Mr. Bradshaw provided this. There is a wide range here. We don't know what to expect. We did set aside the $85,900. That was really the amount that we calculated to provide as an additional day. But I did set it aside in a PTO cash out because when we provide an extra day, it's not a cash out on the balance sheet. And so we put this amount into the payout to help cover a part of it. And then the rest of it's going to come from the substitute savings. The concern is just that we really are spending the substitute budget this year. So we may need to, go back into other payroll laps to cover the rest of this if we don't have enough in over excess budget for substitutes.
So 62% of the budget has been used through January 31st.
Correct.
Correct. So, so 58% of our budget year is gone, and 62% of the budget amount. So we're pretty close.
We're pretty close.
So you
That's-
think the last 5 months are going to get blown out of proportion or something?
Well, no, we've been through about 60% of the year, and we've spent 62% of the budget, and so based on that, we're going to spend
A few percent
the
more.
rest of it.
It's kind of a catch-22 with this, I mean, I know when we discussed this last year and everybody thought, well, private industry does PTO, this makes sense, it's an incentive to employees and that kind of thing, which makes sense. It's not real common in K-12, but it was a good, case for doing this because our substitute budget usually wasn't completely spent, and part of the reason, like, it's a catch-22, when people are calling out sick at the last minute, a lot of schools, you can't find subs, you're going scrambling, teachers will cover and that kind of thing. So you're not spending all your sub budget because you can't always find subs when people are calling at the last minute. Because, people previously, they'll use sick leave days when really maybe they're out for different reasons or whatever, which is, again, the reason, everybody wanted to go to PTO, which makes sense. So the good news is people are planning better because they can use PTO instead of having to call out sick. But because they're planning better, we're also able to get subs more effectively, which means we're spending more of our sub budget. So again, it's a bit of a catch-22. I think, the overall effect in terms of, how you treat employees and that kind of thing, and then doing a PTO model still makes a lot of sense. But this is the first year doing it. So from a budgetary standpoint, the jury's still out in terms of, are we going to be able to cover it in our sub budget, or the good news is normally we would be able to just kind of rely on our payroll apps to kind of cover the difference if the sub budget, if this happened to it. Unfortunately, we've got other things going on this year that makes this kind of harder. But again, I don't think it's a bad program.
Well, that's not my point. My point is we're 58% of the budget through the year, and we're 62%. I mean, we're not far off. It's pretty close. What is the?
I think what he's saying is that there won't be money left over, which is
Do
where
the
we were
payout.
going to do the payout.
If people want to
We were
cash
gonna take it
cash
from
out
that.
their PTO days,
if they did the worst case scenario.
right? Because we can cover our subs. That's not the problem. It's the worried about everything that was built into this as an incentive to not use all your sub days was you'd be able to cash some out at the end of the year. That's the concern, is being able to afford.
So you think the end of the year is going to be hit us heavy?
the payout.
Like, we have to be able to make that payout, and we were going to use the money from the substitute budget, but if we use all of the substitute budget to pay for the subs, then there's not going to be money left over to help
To do the
pay this
payout.
payout that he's talking
Right.
about.
So we're pretty close, though. That's my point.
Well, do we need to look at adjusting the amount of days that we're allowing the payout for?
Probably moving forward.
But not
I don't know if you want to do that midstream.
No, I mean, but what I'm saying is, I think next budget
Absolutely.
we need to be looking at.
Yeah, after we get this year under our belt, we kind of see how it goes. I don't think anybody's saying, hey, this was a bad idea. It's just we need to have, see what the data is really playing out to be able to budget more appropriately.
I thought it was going to save us money in the long run was the idea. And so,
For the payout day versus,
yeah, wasn't that, when we did the math, wasn't it going to,
I don't think I think we definitely knew if people planned better for their absences, that helps instruction side because you can plan better, you can get the subs in and that kind of thing. I don't know if you ever thought you were going to save money.
I doubt it, because what you're paying a sub in a day is probably more than what you're going to pay them on a payout if they're getting a 20% of their daily rate.
Yeah.
or maybe we,
The whole point was just to make sure we have people in our classrooms.
yeah,
because
and
that
the
was such a hard
consistency
time
Right.
and
over several years. And the
right.
first year is going to be the worst year because some have way above the new maximum amount they can carry over.
okay.
But it will not be to this level in the future because they will be paid out this year.
As you were saying, I think the fill rates from last year, we were running low to mid 80s. Our average right now is like 94.3, Chuck, is that what you saw it, 94.3? So our fill rates are so much higher. Therefore, it's much better environment for our students. We're seeing less absences, but again, we're seeing such a higher fill rate. That's why the cost is not being offset quite as much. I do think this is still an incredible program. I think our employees love it, and it's beneficial. I just think right now, like Dr. Nice was saying, the unknown with this first year, we knew that was going to be the case, but of course we never thought we'd hit all these other things that have come up at the same time. So that's the difference.
Okay.
So the next line item that we're keeping a close eye on is our electricity. Mr. Cagle has provided information, and the table on your left-hand side of the screen shows back from 2018 what the cost was for electricity and the increase each year. He is still projecting that the increases are going to be near 19-20%. So he is expecting that we will have a cost overrun of about 1.3 million this year. He has taken a look at all of his divisions that is underneath him to identify some operating savings of things that they could avoid doing. Some of it's going to be in the new line item for the new facilities guys that are doing kind of quick little projects that are asked for that maybe are going to have to be on hold for a little bit. I'm not talking about absolute things are breaking. I'm talking about if a school wants an extra classroom, or if they want an extra wall or an extra door, or little kind of niceties that we've been able to do for the past year with the two facility folks that he has. And a couple of other accounts that seem to have some excess budget. So he thinks he can cover at least 400,000 of this overage. So that leaves us with like 900,000 that we may have to look towards payroll lapse to be able to cover. So this is, again, just an item that we want to, that causes us a little bit of heartburn, and we want to keep an eye out. On a side note, it's in a completely different fund, but he did also look at his capital maintenance program, and he has a couple of projects that are ongoing, or have budget set aside for them, but they're not started. They have not begun. And so he is just going to hold off on beginning those until we kind of see where we land in case we need to use those funds for something else.
I did see where there was a bill in the General Assembly to work with Appalachian Power to try to, because everybody's seeing home prices. I'm getting ready to say that.
Our legislator's gonna bring that down, don't you worry.
Right. Well, it was brought forward, but as Mr. Limburger pointed out, it was killed in committee. So, but I think it was a recognition that there was a problem. I don't know what y'all see on your electricity bills. We're seeing the same thing. So.
I also see my
That's
taxes
what
going
happens
up.
when they pad the pockets of the legislators.
All right, so we'll go on to health insurance next. So the next several slides are going to be various different points of information to provide. We are sitting in an unprecedented age right now with our health insurance fund. To remind everybody, we are self-insured for health insurance. What this means, when anyone goes to a doctor, the doctor bill gets paid by Anthem, and it comes out of our pocket. The entire portion that the employee does not pay for. So that's what it means to be self-insured. We have a lot of folks that have serious illnesses. This is unprecedented. We brought forth some information about this before, and it's unfortunate for our employees. It's an unfortunate situation to be in. The graph in front of you is a monthly graph up from July through December. These are actual numbers. And so you can see the revenues that are coming in, the premiums that are being charged, and then the expenditures, the claims that are getting paid out of the fund. We started the year with 2.9 million in reserves, and as of December, we have 1.4 million, and so this balance is continuing to decline. We receive information weekly and are able to project out what this would look like. So from January through June of 2025, we have projected all of those expenses. We took all of the weekly data, we lobbed off the top 5 weeks, and we lobbed off the bottom 5 weeks so that we're capturing the middle. The next slide I'm going to show you will show the weekly information. So you can kind of see we lobbed that off because of how we're billed from Anthem. The biggest takeaway from this screen is the fact that by June, if we do nothing, we will overspend the fund by almost $1.9 million. So then the next slide, and I'm sorry, this is not the prettiest slide, but this is 52 weeks. This represents a whole year. The black line is the actual claims payments on a weekly basis from last fiscal year, and then the purple bars are what has happened in the current year. And so what you'll see is like week 22 was Thanksgiving, and so the billings were really small. Anthem didn't provide us the bills for that week. And then week 27 was going to be your Christmas time frame. And so we lob off the bottom ones because that leads to the following week being extremely high, catching up in these other claims. So
Just to reiterate that again, that highest bar you see on week, what is that, 28, is not because claims suddenly spiked that 1 week. Just
Correct.
to reiterate, it's because the previous week we didn't have them.
Correct. So I think it's really helpful to understand that we are in unprecedented times. This chart here is kind of a visual to let you know it's a 6-month time period. It compares last fiscal year to this fiscal year and how many claims that we had. I want everyone to understand that we know the types of claims and the types of people. We do not know who these people are. Everyone's confidentiality is preserved. So I could not tell you who any of these employees are. I just know that I have information that we have employees that have cancers, that have nervous system disorders. And we know how much each of those claims are costing us, right? So you can see we had 18 folks in this 6-month time period who cost more than $75,000 for their claim, and they got to that level, right? In the current year, it's 25 claims that have gotten to that level. And you can just see in the first row, the cancers are just astronomical. We went from 588,000 to 1.2 million. And it's unfortunately a lot of sick people. And I hate that for our employees. I hate that for our families. But we do have to pay for this. And this, unfortunately, is one of the risks of being self-insured. If you were fully insured, you pay more on the front end, but you know exactly what your cost is going to be. When you're self-insured, you pay less in the front end, but you do have to pick up all of the claims payments. I did go through all of the 25 claims that make up the 3.8 million this year so far in the 6-month time period. And for every single one of those claims, I calculated how much it was going to cost for them to hit the reinsurance level. We have reinsurance at $250,000. All but one claim follows that. We have one claim that has been what the insurance company calls is a laser, and they make us keep the risk to $450,000. Last year it was 2 lasers, now it's only 1. So that's a better situation than what we were in. I calculated the differential between the 3.9 million that we've already incurred and what our full liability and only these 25 claims would be, and that could be another 2.5 million just on these employees and sick folks. This does not include the next folk that comes along. You know, when I have a heart attack tomorrow, it doesn't include like my claim. Making a joke, sorry. Bad joke.
Bad joke.
Sorry. But no, I'm serious. This does not include any of the unknowns because we have, you know, over 2,000 employees out there, and this is only 25 of them. And so I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, if you will, but we have to have reality that this could get worse before it gets better. I took the same information. So the left-hand side again is prior year, and the right-hand side is the current year. I won't walk through the minutia, but I'll explain how this chart works. For each time period, I was able to identify how many were employees, how many were spouses, and how many were children. And within each of those, I was able to break them apart by age group so that we could see what group we're talking about. And then finally, I was able to identify the triangles that are black, their claim cost between $75,000 and $100,000. The triangles that are green, $100,000 to $150,000. The triangles that are red, $150,000 to $250,000. And then the X's are the ones that have already exceeded our liability, and they are now under reinsurance. So you can see what the trends are here. It's mostly the folks in the 45 to 64 that's really driving up the claims. So I do have some go-forward strategies for our health insurance. So I'd like to go through those because we are expecting to continue to see medical trends going up 8%, pharmacy trends going up 10%. Some short-term strategies. Taking a look at payroll lapse, I think we can afford to go ahead and move $1 million out of our general fund and transfer it over to the health insurance fund to shore it up a little bit. It's not enough, but it will help a little bit. We would have to take this to the Board of Supervisors because it's changing our categories, and the ordinance will need to be adjusted. Another thing is we did receive a check from Avis to refund us some money on the Williamsburg project of $191,524. I would like to go ahead and ask the county to appropriate that so that that's in our coffers available to be used whenever the school board sees fit. We would have that allocated to the facilities function. Within the health insurance fund, we contribute to an OPEB trust, and this is a vehicle set up to accumulate funds to pay for retiree insurance later down the road. I'll talk about that a little bit later. We have budgeted to pay $92,290 into the trust this year, and it really is up to the entity if we pay into it or not. We don't have to, and so we could avoid paying that for the current year to save a little bit, but it's something. And so then I just wanted to share where our major and minor capital. Just to let you know, we do have 1.6 million sitting in major capital now, and 1.9 million sitting in major capital. If we do the $1 million transfer from the Board of Supervisors, it would hit. It would be my hope to get that put in place in February so that we could influx a little bit of cash into the fund. So that's going to help a little bit, and we will not get to negative balances until May, and then we'll start to get into the negative again
If the trend continues.
if the trend continues. And it could be that I'm giving you worst case scenario and it gets better. I don't know. I don't have that crystal ball. So I keep saying, we'll take all of this out of payroll lapse, we'll take all this out of payroll lapse. I did want to provide some information on what the payroll lapse looks like right now. The payroll lapse that has resulted from position changes or unfilled positions that have occurred between July 1st and January 15th provided $1.8 million. And then we have payroll lapse for open positions. If we don't fill any positions between now and the end of the school year, we would have $2.3 million in payroll lapse. And so that gives us about $4 million of lapse to fall back on. Of the items that I have shared, the revenue deficit, the maximum exposure for PTO, the electricity, the health insurance transfer, if all of that comes out of the payroll lapse and they're at that level, which we don't think it's going to be 100% that level, we're looking at having payroll lapse of 880,334 at the end of the year.
So I got one question. So if we do this, I'm looking at starting July. What are we looking at for reserves at that point? Like, because that will affect the rate of increase for health insurance for our employees.
Well, right now, we're still looking at July being negative.
Right. So according to the consultant, what's the number that they were recommending? 4 million
Yes.
in
It's a
reserves?
range of, I think last year we presented in March was a range of 3.7 to about 4.2, so yes, you're right.
So I guess what concerns me is we know that the healthcare is increasing, just like our electric's increasing and everything else. But if the healthcare costs are going to increase and we're going to essentially be at zero, that's not going to look good for our health insurance increase. And I don't know what the percentages are, and I'm sure it would take the consultant a lot of math figures to figure that out. But that's my main concern right now is what are we planning to do in order to shore that up so we're not going to be killing our employees come July, because it could easily overtake the raise that we're able to give. And we've worked really hard over the last few years to kind of get those numbers boosted up to our neighboring districts, and this could potentially completely negate that. So just kind of wondering where are we at? What do we need to be looking at to fix that? I know you can't answer that right now, but I think that everybody in the room needs to come together and we need to figure out how we're going to fix this.
Well, I think that's a great transition into my next slide, because the next slide starts where we want to have the discussion of what are long-term strategies. We will have the healthcare consultant come in at the February 13th work session to help us work through some of these issues. There is a lot of work that we will put forth to come up with premiums and rates and costs. All of that will be worked through before the 13th. When we come back, so first and foremost, we'll look at the plan design. One thing that's on the table is we currently offer a Key Care 1000 with an HRA and a Key Care 2000 with an HRA. And so the thought is we could drop the 2000 and add a qualified high deductible healthcare plan for 3,400 level with an HSA accompanying it. So that plan alone is going to save us money in the costs, right? So that's going to be a cheaper option than what we currently have. The other thing we could think about is offering the 2000 HRA and the high deductible with the HSA. That's going to be even cheaper. And then the third thing we could think about is just, at this point, just go into the 2000 HRA. So what we'll do is we'll cost all of that out. We'll bring premiums back so that you can take a look at that. We'll remind you that when we looked at adding 3 plans, it was not the top 2 plans did not have an actuarial value with a differential that made it worthwhile. And so it just really was not in the favor of the school board to move to 3 plans. And that still holds true. So
Essentially
we-
because they're paying less a month, which goes to the reserves.
Right.
And your point's an important one. You're talking about two different things here. One, we, definitely, like we struggled with last year, want to keep premiums for employees as low as possible, but at the same time, we've got to build our reserves back up, so it's tough.
I think it's imperative too that we keep an option for folks that would prefer to pay a little more, but to have better coverage too. I don't, is 2,000 doable? Maybe, and I know some of the others were what, 3,000, 4,000, something like they were looking at. That might be a little harder for some, but
Well,
definitely
these
I
are
think.
the exact plans that we have the information on that we're going to cost out. So if you want something other than this, I'll need to know that to provide it.
I don't think there's a need because, like you were saying, it's not going to do anything for the reserves. It would actually hurt us.
Right. Yep.
So we beat this question around quite a bit on the consultant. Are we looking at another consultant to look at our plan? Are we looking, how's that coming along? What are we thinking? Looking at the self-funding versus plans?
So you've got multiple questions in there. I've got some more slides and additional things we're going to look at on the 13th that I'll go through. As far as with the consultant, I shared with Ms. Fashani, she has sent some questions about that. I received information today and didn't have time to compile it, so I will send an email out on what that would look like. And answer all of the questions that she asked, along with some additional comments about that. And we can move forward however the school board desires.
Can I also share an option that won't be popular but may be a hard thing to consider, but is on the table? I would think it's on the table, right? So we know in the last couple years that our counterparts should have plenty of cash, right? So, worst case scenario, it's not above me to go to them to ask, and I would hope we would consider this if we need additional funds. If we look at the last decade, our revenue sharing has been basically dropped from 43% to 41%. So that's a couple, $3 million a year right there that we've essentially made our budget and done our business without. And so, and we know that basically revenue was raised last year by 15 million, essentially because there's no real changes in the economy. There'll be another 15 million plus the property tax increases that are going into effect this year on top of that. So, to ask for some help on the schools and for this project should be an easy slam dunk ask, but I think it has to be the will of the board to do that. That's all.
Other strategies that we can look at, we can add a 2% margin to the premiums that would help build up the reserves a little bit, get a margin in there.
And what do you mean by that?
We cost out more to the premium. The premium is higher, so we would pay more into it. Unfortunately, we're either going to charge more or we're not going to, or we're going to take more out of general fund. It's a hard situation. We could always look at eliminating the school couple rate. So currently there is a lower rate when both spouses work for the school division. We could eliminate that and just have them sign up like anyone else. The county had that option, and many years ago they took that away. So they don't have a school couple or a county couple rate any longer. But that is one that we kept holding on to.
Approximately how much might that save?
I wouldn't have that now, but I can look into that. We can also charge a higher premium for retirees. Right now, the way that our premiums are calculated, we come up with a premium, and then the $2,500 contribution from the school board for the current year, and for EWIP, $3,000 next year that the school board voted in previously. That's just taken off of the same premium rate that the employees pay. One thing that the county does do a little bit differently is they actually charge retirees a higher premium than what they charge the employees.
Do we hold that for the 5 years that they're on the EWIP, or do we go beyond that?
It's just 5 years that they're supposed to get the amount. Isn't that correct?
They can keep our insurance until 65, but they only get that 3,000 help, if you will, for the 5 years.
Okay. So when they go beyond the 5 years, does I guess the price goes up?
Yes.
They pay the full amount then.
Okay.
I mean, they're already paying the full amount. They're paying the employee and the employer portion, but for 5 years, they're getting $3,000 toward that. Just to be clear.
I believe that's correct.
And then
Correct.
after the 5 years, they're still paying the full amount, but they're not getting the amount. Yeah,
But it's the same rate,
right.
So they pay the same rate? Okay, gotcha.
right? So and another way to think about this is we come up with a premium and then we determine the employee portion and the employer portion. They pay that same premium that the other two are calculated off of.
So I have a question, Susan, for you. What you mentioned, there's a couple things that the county does differently from us. Are there any other things that are worth mentioning that they do a little bit differently that might make a difference for us?
The only other one that I know that they do different is they only give the HRA for folks who do the wellness, where we give the HRA to everybody and we just have different premium rates for the wellness. When I costed that out, when they made that change, they made that change a year or two ago. I costed it out, and it would not have helped us.
Okay.
It's going to be more of a hit to our general fund to do that. That is one that I can think of off the top of my
And
head.
essentially, you just have to go to Marathon to get a physical
Okay.
each year.
Okay.
And then you answer some questions and you get the discount.
Oh,
It's
really?
not a lot to it.
Yeah, it's just a couple of steps to get to the wellness, and it's pretty simple to get there.
So can we see what this would look like in terms of how much it would help and if it's worth it for both of those two things?
Yes. And I'm sorry, this is a lot on one slide, but I promise this is the last one. And all of these in these past 3 slides are information that we do plan to bring back to you at the 13th work session. So it's going to be a heavy work session the next time we meet for budget. So it has been asked to see what will the cost and the premiums be if we were fully insured. So we'll have some information on that from the consultant. There's a new hybrid insurance out there that I'm aware of. It's a mixture of being fully and self-insured, and we will look into that as asked. There are 2 different types of stop loss. There's an aggregate stop loss and an individual stop loss. We have individual stop loss. We do not carry aggregate. At one point in time, we did carry aggregate, and I'll have her bring some information as to whether it would be appropriate to change either of those or even change the level of our stop loss. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we went from 200,000 stop loss level up to the 250. And so we can bring some information. Unfortunately, if we change that, we're going to pay more in premiums for administration for that stop loss level. So for everything we do, there's going to be a cost. Either we're going to pick up more claims or we're going to pick up more administrative costs.
Do we need to explain what the difference is, aggregate versus individual?
Sure. The aggregate is they take a look at all of our claims for an entire year. And if the differential in what that claim amount is different from what Anthem thinks it should be, or whoever's reinsuring us thinks it should be, then they will start picking up the claims. I don't know. We've never, when we had it, it never kicked in. So I'm not sure if when they calculate that, they calculated it at such a high level that it really covers the reinsurer more so. I don't know. But that's what the aggregate does. It covers us for the whole year. The individual stop loss is one claim, one person, and it's within the confines of a year. And so when that person starts going back to the doctor, so if it's someone who has a recurring illness that is going to last many years, then we will be on the hook for the $250 every single year. It doesn't go for the life of the claim, it just goes for the fiscal year for us, the $250. We'll also bring some information. We've asked for it. We hope to be able to get some information back. For the savings of the medical clinic, we do pay for the medical clinic from the health insurance fund. And the whole thought process and the reason why we implemented the medical clinic is we don't pay claims for folks to visit the clinic. They can visit the clinic and we pay a contracted cost to the clinic. And so it should be that we're having savings or cost avoidance by not paying the claims for folks to go to their own primary care for some of the easier stuff. Now, the folks at the clinic would not ever replace a primary care physician. So if you have something that a specialist would want to see, they definitely want you to go to your specialist, your primary care. But if you just have a cold, if you have something that they can take a look at and help, allergy shots, routine things like that, then it's a great place to go, and we don't pay an extra claim when folks visit our clinic.
That might be a good place to look, because I'm sure that contract's not cheap.
It is not cheap.
Do we know what percentage of our employees use the clinic?
I have asked them for all that information. I don't know it off the top of my head. They stay pretty busy. They do stay highly utilized, but I don't know the numbers off the top of my head.
When she lists this, like that's something we're definitely going to do is review that cost savings to get that cost benefit analysis, to get the usage, what's actually saved, the cost avoidance for them actually going to their own doctor. So that's something we'll actually do and bring back.
But we need to make sure, too, that they're doing that just for school employees, because I believe county employees can still visit that one.
They can, and we can visit theirs.
So make sure that we're
make
getting
sure
the
we're
numbers
looking at-
just for us, not county combined.
Yeah.
Yes. The jail's employees come to ours as well, but that's not very many of them. We will also bring information about the OPEB trust. As I mentioned before, the OPEB trust is an investment vehicle that we have set up so that we can set aside funds to pay future claims for our retirees. We have never used it. We started many years ago putting money into the trust, and I will bring forth, we've got some information from the folks and actuarial folks to be able to share what our contribution should be to get to the different levels of coverage, and whether we should kind of use that to cover any of our retiree claims, the purpose of it, why it's set up, and there are bigger implications. We can't just walk away from that because it does impact the county and their credit rating. So we'll bring all of that information and share that with you. And then finally, in the next PowerPoint presentation, I will share, we do have a recommendation to, currently we have an original amount going into the fleet fund. I recommend taking 2.2 million of what we would put into the fleet fund for next year to purchase vehicles, and just for 1 year redirect that to the health insurance fund to help shore up the reserves. So all of that is everything that like I said, it's going to be a heavy meeting, the next meeting. A lot of information about insurance and all of our options. I will have our consultants come to visit as well to provide information. And Mr. Greenway and Ms. Pashani, I will send an email tonight responding back about the consultant. So any other comments, thoughts on current year? All right, if you'll give me 1 second. That's it for this one.
All right, item 2.02, 2025, 2026 budget work session number 1, Miss Susan Peterson.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So now we're gonna switch our focus, and instead of looking to the current year situation, we're gonna look to next year, and begin our talks as to what are we gonna do for school year 2025, 2026. We'll take a look at the governor's budget and a couple other revenue numbers we have. We'll take a look at the long-term replacement plans and some department budget information that we have compiled. So first, with the governor's budget, we'll look at enrollment. We've got some slides in here, and in the interest of time, I won't go through every single slide, but I do have them in here for your information. Some of them are just carryover from last year. We'll look at some highlights from the governor's budget and some other potential changes. So first off, we do use the grade level progression methodology. This year, when I went to go look up live births, the data was not updated to provide new information from when I did this last year. But Weldon Cooper has a report published out there that does project out for the next several years. So I went ahead and used the kindergarten number that they had for next year. It seemed to be pretty good. And then for grades 1 through 12, we just take if a student was in 5th grade this year, when they go to 6th grade next year, how many stayed with the school division. So just grade level progression, right? And when we do the grade level progression, we average 5 years worth of information. We don't do it for just 1 year. And we take the prior 5 years and apply that average to the December enrollment reports that we get. So on the right-hand side, the numbers that we have to work with, the grade level progression, we saw 13,174 as our estimated enrollment for next year. The VDOE planning tool had 13,145. Weldon Cooper report that I used had 13,215. And so after much deliberation and discussion with administration, we landed on 13,160. So a number between VDOE and the grade level progression. So this is a reduction in students. And this next slide, I think, Mr. Greenway, is what we were looking for. So this shows the history from 2020 through what we're projecting out to be for 2026. The purple bars show the grade level progression estimates. The brown is the VDOE estimates. The tan is Weldon Cooper. The red line shows where we landed with the budget. And then the green line shows where our March 31st ADM came in at. So I do think so when we go through this process, we do look at the next 3 years. So we've already projected out 27, 28, and 29 school years, and they are still continuing to look to be in a decline.
I guess if we're trying to pause right there and just see if there's consensus that's the move to that. We discussed this. I mean, normally we would be just looking at that probably middle of the road grade progression at 13,174. I would rather just be a little more conservative next year, basically, based on what we're experiencing now. And so that's why we're kind of hitting that middle number right there. But, I think we do need to have consensus to say, okay, do you all agree that we're kind of on the right track there? Because which we will probably want to avoid as we get into budget discussions, and then we see it's difficult to balance everything we want to, fit in, to go back and say, well, let's just change the ADM because it might lead to, some decisions that might have ramifications, that we don't like. So if that makes sense.
I think we've been pretty good in the past with listening to what staff recommend and come to it, but I think given the trend that we're seeing, this will be the near year to be as conservative as possible. I would agree. I hate to leave money on the table, but.
Right.
Are you suggesting a number lower than 13,160?
No, I'm just saying, I'm asking, do you all, are we all on board in terms of, that's what we need to shoot for?
Yeah,
Again, you probably don't want to get too far into the the struggles of trying to balance a budget and then say, let's go back and revisit that. If you know, you want to probably want to avoid that.
Seems like a good number to me.
Okay. I'm not going to beleaguer this. This is the LCI formula. It's just for your information. It's how the state determines the portionality that each locality is responsible for versus what they're responsible for. And then these are the trends. This is exact same as last year when the state changes the LCI, revisits it. They do it on a 2-year basis, and so this is just what we had in there last year. So just wanted to provide that information. So moving on to page 8, we do have the governor's budget, the revenue estimates. With our decrease in students, it's 176 students that we are estimating a reduction for. Even given that, we do see maybe 846,000 additional money coming into the general fund. It's not a lot, and we recognize that. And so we have taken, Dr. Nicely and staff have taken some measures you'll see later on to see where we can streamline things. The grant fund is going up by 221,000. So in the general fund, the big decrease is $1 million in SOQ, directly related to the ADM. We do have 2.2 million of an increase for compensation. So I don't know if this is good news or bad news. We've given some pretty high raises in pretty recent years. When the governor adopted this budget, the raise, he said, had to be 3% in year 1, 3% in year 2, for a total of 6% over the biennium. The law was written so that if you gave more than 3% in year 1, that counts toward your percent in year 2. We gave 5% last year, and so we only need to make up 1% this year in order to achieve full funding for the compensation increase. It would be my hope and desire that we could at least do a step. A step is a 1.6% increase for all employees. We'll bring that information at the next work session. We don't have it right now. We'll have to obtain information from HR to be able to project that out. I just hate that it's not, a big increase like what we've been able to do in the past several years.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think 1% when we did that, it was a little over $1 million, maybe 1.3, something like that, per 1% raise. Does that sound right?
Something like that. Might be a little bit higher now since we've
given raises.
gone up so much.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. That number keeps going.
And then we did have a decrease in the infrastructure and operations per pupil allocation. The grant fund increase is an increase in the VPI funding.
Which is preschool.
Yes, Virginia Preschool Initiative. Some other revenue line items that we have been able to carve out, and I've got work in process on here because staff is still looking at all of our revenue lines to sharpen their pencils and see where we can maybe receive a little bit more revenue or if it needs to be reduced. So the first line item is the only reduction in other revenues that's going to have an impact. And this is a new law that does not allow us to charge a transcript fee to students. That's considered part of their student record. And so we can charge a transcript fee to a college or another company, but we cannot to a student. And so that's going to reduce our revenues by about $11,000. We are increasing the non-resident tuition simply due to participation. The amount of revenue that we have seen last year compared to budget was higher, and so we're just chewing that up a little bit. We are told that the online academy fees due to participation is going to be higher. I took a look at the interest income, and interest income is interesting because the county we have pooled cash with the county, so all of the income is for interest allocated across all of their fiduciary agents. In the current year, since we have the 3 construction projects ongoing, and we're in the middle of getting our literary loan set up, and we'll be going out for our VPSA bonding. Actually, I'll be bringing that application to you at the next work session for approval. Since all that's kind of ongoing, we have negative cash in our projects at this time. And so we're not earning interest like we would expect in the current year, but I think by the time we get flushed back with our literary loan reimbursements, we will be fine. I say all that. I do think we can. Last year we had like 400,000 of interest, and we only budgeted a pittance, like 87,000, and so I think we can get that up to 100,000 budget. I wouldn't go higher than that, but I think we can put it to 100,000. And then alternative ed was going up just a little bit. So I do think we'll have another 97,000 of other revenue increase for next year. Dual enrollment, there was a law change for that, but don't get too excited because this is not going to hurt us. We have dual enrollment as a revenue and an expenditure. So we're going to reduce both the revenue and we're going to reduce the expenditure. So it is a net zero effect for our bottom line.
I would get excited because that means kids who maybe couldn't afford it could now take dual enrollment classes because it's going to be paid for. On the budget side, not get excited, but in the spirit of our children, be excited.
There you go.
Kumbaya.
Yeah.
Well, if there's no other questions on revenue, we'll move into the replacement plans. So we've got a whole slew of them to go through. Replacement plans are adopted for multiple different reasons, but the be-all, end-all is it's our way to forecast out in which year we're going to have large increases or needs for cash so that we can adjust our transfer into the other fund at a slower pace so that it's not a huge pain. It also allows us in years like this where we have a need to redirect some cash. It does not hurt us in the general fund. We can just redirect and not do some other purchases. So first is the fleet replacement plan. And I do apologize, this is a ton of information, but it is a very large plan. It encompasses a lot of information. We do have, so the top part is, and this kind of is the structure for all of our plans. The top box is where the money's going to come in to support the plan. The next box are what we need to spend, and the bottom box shows our fund balance and our ending fund balance. So when we look at all of these, the first column will always be what ends up the budget for that. Most of our replacement plans go directly with a fund. So that first column ends up being our budget for next year. And then we estimate out what our needs are for the future year. And our goal is, at the end of the day, the bottom line, the last row on the entire sheet, we hope to be positive, and we adjust the transfer from the general fund to ensure that that stays positive all the way. So as I mentioned in our last meeting, or last presentation, to help shore up the health insurance fund, I am recommending going ahead and taking the majority of our transfer out of the fleet replacement fund. Last year we increased this by 2.2 million and then added another $500,000 for the activity fund buses. So we had 2.7 in here that we could take out. So I am recommending not making any large purchases for next year with buses or other vehicles. We have bought a significant number of buses and vehicles in the past several years. And if I can quote Mr. Kegels, I think our fleet is in better position than it's been in years. And so I think that we can, I don't think any of our fleet is in a position where we are going to break down on the road and have problems next year. I think we do have aged school buses that we want to get on the plan, and you can see that by seeing that we have front-loaded a bunch of buses, regular education buses. We do need to catch up on that, and at some point, we hope that that's a possibility. But we are kind of back in the ball game. The past several years, we've done a good job of replacing minibuses. One thing we did add to the plan that we never had on here before was car seats. So for any of our smaller students, the younger ones that need to be in a car seat, we do have, I guess, 540 car seats in total. And we put these in a replacement plan because, you know, car seats do expire after 7 years. And so the thought is go ahead and put in a recurring place for this so that there aren't any calls from the transportation department to the special education department saying, hey, do you have any extra money that you can buy some car seats? I just think that if the transportation department knows what needs to be replaced, they can go ahead and have the funding to replace that without going to operating needs. So I think that'll be a benefit for everybody. So that's our fleet replacement plan. Next up is our textbook adoption plan. Same thing, we've got revenues coming in, expenditures going out. This next year in 2026, we don't have a big adoption. The next big adoption will be in 2028. And what you'll see on here, I worked with Mr. Riley, and we tweaked the textbook plan last year so that we would fund the big adoptions the year before. We're not going to buy them, but what this allows us to do is to place the purchase order, you know, a couple months before year end, so that in the summertime the books can arrive and we can pay for them with the new money. But we can't set up that purchase order unless the money's there, right? And so this allows us to set up the purchase order in 2027 so that we can have the books for the 2028 school year. So we just front load that. I am recommending reducing the textbook.
I think it's a typo on here. So you're reducing it by 50,000, right?
No, sir, I'm reducing it by $500,000.
Okay.
We had $1 million going in there in the current year.
Okay.
And so I want to reduce it by $500,000. You've made me lose my train of thought, Mr. Riley.
Because I saw the 550 across, so I thought you dropped it by 50,000.
No, I dropped it by $500,000, and then I'm going to add $50,000 each year to ensure we're not out of balance at the bottom. One thing that we did do, you'll see later on, there is one resource that some of the departments were paying for, and we're going to fund that through the textbook fund this next year, and then their actual accounts will go down slightly. So that's some savings in the general fund that we were able to identify. We do have a 2% or 3% inflation factor for most of these resources. So any thoughts? All right, moving on to the technology replacement plan. This is one that always seems to go up. We did have some big ticket items in 2026 that have risen to the table. One of these is the card access swipe system is increasing. This is going to be a new lease that we'll set up. So if you look, it's the equipment lease dash card access, the $410,000. That'll be new, and that's to replace all the swipes in all of the buildings, just due to the age technology. Building security, the 236 near the bottom is a big jump up. I think it went from 95 to 236 or somewhere about there. So that's jumping up, and that's just due to the certain programs that we need to buy. And then replacing computers for 6th and 9th grade and some staff is another large jump. And so with the technology replacement plan, we are going to need another $330,469 to fully fund their replacement plan. It will get us to a very tight ending fund balance where they're going to have less than 5,000 in ending fund balance. But that's okay because we'll have enough revenue to cover them.
Susan, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Just for the public's knowledge, could you, the leasing of the computers, that's 2.8, and I've gotten some questions about this out from stakeholders. It's just so expensive, the laptops, right? So we're giving laptops K through 12.
Correct.
It's cheaper to lease
It is.
in the long run. And then, is there ever a thought, geez, maybe our K through 3 doesn't need laptops and we could save some money there and just go back to the old school way of doing things? I'm just curious. I get a lot of comments about this, all the screen time, all the blue light. I'm not saying that our kids shouldn't be technologically savvy. I'm not saying that advancements can't be made. I'm not saying we need to hide in a bubble. But I'm just wondering, when we're looking at budgets, is this something that we should really consider? Because it is a consider. I don't know if you can break down the amount of money that we're, because 2.8 is quite a bit of money. I don't know if just by taking 3 or 4 grades off of that, if we could be saving some money.
So I will say, our elementary schools, we bought all laptop carts for all of the schools during COVID, and we used COVID money for it. This would have been the year to replace that. We took it off of the plan, so we are not replacing the elementary school laptops right now. They're in carts, and they'll last another year.
Okay.
So those numbers are not leased out in this plan right now.
So that doesn't include K, first, second, third.
It does
What
include
does it not
those.
include?
What you're saying is normally the lease, the lease does cover middle school and high school. It hasn't up until now covered elementary because
That was
with
COVID money.
grant money we were able to buy them. Normally this year we should have built that into the lease, but we worked with Mr. Terry to say, hey, can we put that off a year? Because that increase would have been
It would have been
another
considerable.
$1 million
Okay, that's
to do
important
it.
to know.
Yeah, but I think your point is, your question really is larger than that. Should we instructionally look at, do we want to have the one-to-one, in those lower grades?
Right.
And I think that's something that should be evaluated instructionally, in fairness to your point.
So when would those leases for those grade levels need to be renewed? Like, what is that, 2 years down the line and a year down the line? Or,
So, I don't want to speak for you.
and how much money would that be?
You're talking about for the elementary or the
Because right now we don't need to do it, right? You said
Yeah, right now, they're not leased.
we don't need to do it, right? So, but when we do need to do it,
It'd be about probably another $1 million, right, Jeff? So get the elementary in there.
Another year minimum, I mean, that's when we would be requesting.
so we're talking 2027.
So I think to your point, before we do that next year,
Should
I think
evaluate it.
Yeah, I think we should have that discussion.
Okay, yeah. I would just,
In terms of the one-to-one ratio, keep in mind, prior we didn't have enough laptops, and I see Mr. Williams probably back there cringing because in the upper grades in elementary we do need them for testing, but in the lower grades, we didn't previously have a one-to-one ratio. They're not take-home; they're on cards, but we did get to a one-to-one ratio in elementary. But maybe that needs to be revisited, maybe in the lower grades, heading into the following year's budget, I think.
there's good, better, best, right? And so, in an ideal world, with all the money in the world, that would be a great thing to do. I just don't think that, it's a way to save money in the future. So something to think about.
Well, I think it's a budgetary consideration, but I think to your point, there's also, instructional consideration in terms of really what should be happening, what needs to happen. So I think we have to look at both of those.
And there's some data out there about these kids on the laptop all the time, and
Yeah, don't disagree.
the instructional learning is maybe not as effective had it been pen and paper.
So this year, in this year's budget, we're avoiding about $1 million by not leasing
Doing
them.
that,
But I
okay.
think ahead of, when we go into this, between now and next year's budget, I think that needs to be evaluated before we automatically just include all of those in the lease.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anything else on the tech plan? So the next plan is the nutrition equipment replacement plan. Ms. Estrada pulled this together. The first column is what she plans on spending next year. This is nothing to do with the general fund, but it is her plan of how she keeps the kitchens, fully stocked with new equipment, and it helps to keep our kitchens cooking without having any downtime due to maintenance issues. And she's done a great job of maintaining and getting these updated.
I have one more question, Susan, I'm sorry. I want to interrupt your train of thought. Last year we had talked about the lunch debt. Do we have any estimates on what that lunch debt is projected for?
It's significant.
It is?
Yes.
Greater than 100,000?
It's not greater than 100, but it's creeping very close.
So it's comparable to what we had last year?
Yes.
Getting up there. And one of the concerns is I think there's a bill in the General Assembly is it the state level or federal level? State level, I think.
I can't remember which.
To say, look, you can't collect on the debt, so you have to just eat it as a school division, and that's concerning. At some point, I think
It's a burden.
Those who can't afford ought to pay their lunch, but.
So have we done a better job? I'm not saying we're doing a good job. So have we improved the ways that we educate folks that how the lunch system works? There was talk about outreach and things like that, because you can't.
It's limited what you can do,
right.
right?
It's limited, and Ms. Estrada has text messaging set up, she has emails set up, she has letters set up. She does everything she possibly can do to collect. What this law changes for us, so anytime a student orders a meal, we give them a meal, right? If they don't have money in their account, if it's a meal, we let them charge the meal to their account. So what happens is when that gets negative, the hope is that we can notify parents, and they're like, oh, I forgot, let me add money to the account, and then the account goes positive. A la carte cannot go on a negative account, so it's not like a student can come up and buy an ice cream or something special or extra or different using their account. It's only meals that go onto the account. So it really truly is only meal debt. Currently, when a student leaves the division, that ends up being a bad debt expense in the general fund to pay to the nutrition fund, because by law, the nutrition fund cannot cover their own debt. What the law does is says at the end of the year, all debt gets wiped out. So regardless of whether that student stays or the student goes, we have to wipe out all debt. So instead of, and we're looking at maybe a $25,000 bad debt expense this year, instead of facing that, we could be facing almost a $100,000 bad debt expense if this law comes through. So that could be a significant financial dilemma that we will have to face going forward.
Okay. Wow. I wish there was a better solution.
Yes. So moving on to the CMP, just updated this. They've got 1.5 million going into it. I don't know if you recall, we started the CMP several years ago, and a couple of years ago we started adding 250,000 every year just to keep increasing the balances, for inflation, for additional projects, just to keep building up the balance. For 2026, we are not going to increase it. This is level funded, the same amount that they got in 2025. We did plan, though, hoping we'll come out of the light in 2027. We will start putting back the 250 in to build up so that they can do more CMP type projects going forward. The CIP, now these are our big projects. One big change on this that you're going to see, and our old projects have dropped off, and so these are now the projects that we will get to in 2030 when the funding builds back up. I have not changed any of the costing for any of the projects, although I do think by the time we get a little bit closer, we're going to have to take a look at the estimates that build into the costing out for these projects, and some of them may end up higher cost than what they are showing on here. But I think we're kind of too far out to be able to lay better numbers in that, right? So for next year, the one change that I did put in place, one of our main funding sources is capital reserves. And so if you recall, we just closed the school year for the fiscal books and booked a carryover into the major capital fund, but we immediately had to reduce the carryover by the 600,000. And that's this major capital reserves built into the CIP. So that's why we had to do that in the current year. I am taking out that 600,000 for next year because the thought is that's going to come from our payroll lapse, and not knowing what our payroll lapse is going to be, not knowing what's going to happen with our current balances. I just didn't want to obligate the school division to holding back a certain dollar amount from minor capital when in reality we don't quite need it yet. So that's one big change. We will still get the transfer from the county for debt reserves and refunding credits, and so all of that will start to populate the Northside Middle renovation project. So everything, so going forward, we'll return back to the populating the funding into one project until we can take care of it, and then we'll move on to the next project. So that we'll start going through that process. So now we'll move back into the department budgets. This first page shows all of the department budgets except for contracts, and so contracts are not a part of this. We've not budgeted that out yet, but you can see in 2025, 56.5 million was set aside for all the different departments. Administration got together with each of the departments, and the departments were able to identify $122,466 to reduce their line items. And you can see each department, how much each department kind of gave up, if you will. I will say on my own behalf, some of the departments, instead of giving up funds, redirected it to cover other known high costs coming in. For example, I have zero in mind, but that's because I cut a lot to cover an 8% increase that I expect to have for insurance, which is significant. And so I shifted my budget around to cover that. And so that's what a lot of the departments did as well, because typically we do bring forth a contractual increase that's required, and we are covering all of that within our own departments. So we are taking a hard look. Dr. Nicely, Dr. Soltis has done a really good job of leading great discussions with each of the departments. The next column are transfers. So these are where we have identified some inefficiencies in how we pay for things or how we manage things, where we have, for example, cell phones coming out of all the different departments. So we're going to collapse that, put it in one department, and have one person manage that entire process for us. And we think that we will find some efficiencies by doing that. So then you can see what the final kind of baseline budget will start with for the departments. So this is a little bit different way to look at it than we've done in the past, but I think the situation that we're in right now, facing loss in students, facing the health insurance claims, liabilities that we're facing, this is new uncharted territory, and we're taking different looks as we can. So now we'll get into the typical requests from the departments and things to increase or decrease the line items. We'll start with administration. Carryover, so on all of these, there will be a red asterisk in front of any item that was on the list last year. And so, we brought forth a budget to you, and we were able to do most of the things on that budget, but there were some items that we just didn't have enough money to cover. And so those are the items we went back to the department to ensure, yes, you want to keep this on the list, and So they're still on the list if they wanted to, and then we also added any new items that they would have requested or identified as a need. In the administration department, the athletic allotments, we had wanted to give more last year, and we were unable to fund 50,000, and so this is the remaining 50,000 that was a request of last year. The next item was to convert all the 5 athletic directors from a 240 contract up to a 260 contract. I did have a number on there last year. I made all numbers that related to personnel TBD so that we could run the step increase to see what it would actually cost under the new scenario. So all of that information will be filled in the next time we meet. The third item on the list for administration are middle school assistant coach stipends. These are for the sports that do not have an assistant coach. They only have one coach. And so we have a list of what those stipends are, and then the total cost of that would be $77,508. For my department, so all the transfers roll through my department. The reduction in the fleet plan is 2.7. The reduction in the textbook adoption plan is $500,000. The increase for the technology replacement plan would be $330,469. A new item on here is the North Side High School turf replacement. As you know, we have 3 different reserves set up for all of the other turf fields. And we put in 25,000, and the county matches 25,000. So we get 75,000 from the county each year to cover the replacement cost for the future to help us build up. We do not have Northside High on the plan because it was just recently built. It was the most recent one. So I would like to get that on the list. I have reached out to our county counterparts to ask if they would be so kind and contribute as well. And they let me know that they are in the middle of their budget discussions and they will consider it and let us know. The next item is the required joint capital funding policy, the $530,000. That will be an increase in our budget every single year for probably as long as I'm here. This got us to the 2020 plan and helped fund the current projects that are under construction now. And then the last one is transferring the part of the fleet replacement plan into the health insurance reserves.
Let's reiterate one thing, again, just for the good of anyone watching and the good of the board. Just to reiterate what she said, some of these things are carried over from what was on the list from last year. Just keep in mind, some of these things are, fall in the realm of nice to do and well intended and good things to do. Some fall in the realm of we have to do. So just keep that in mind as we go through.
I call that the good, better, best.
Right.
It would be nice. But yes.
So moving on, in the Human Resources Department, we would like to give a step increase. We will have some kind of increase for health insurance claims. We'll calculate that for the next meeting. And then employees have through tomorrow to turn in, is that correct?
Right.
To turn in their request to participate in the early retirement program. And so that always changes. We always, the program goes for 5 years. We always have a group coming off of the plan and then another group coming onto the plan. And so that number just changes. Moving into facilities and operations, they still want to take a look at adding a special education route manager and converting 2 administrative assistants to analysts. And then the big ticket item we've already talked about, electricity, is a very large number. And we are going to get some additional information and ensure that that is a good estimate. We were asked to get some additional information, and we will provide that. School counseling, on the list last year, we would like to continue. A request and we would like to implement is the school counselor floater who could help with absences. And then new to list is converting 11 school counseling coordinators from a contract of 240 to 260. Moving into People Personnel Services, Ms. Harmon would like to, Dr. Harmon, sorry about that, would like to add a speech language pathologist for private day students. And I would like to kind of step back on this for a minute. Currently, students who have an IEP and who are in a private day placement and need speech services, we are having a very difficult time contracting and getting someone out to service these needs. And what she thinks would help is if we could hire a speech pathologist, then we could assign that speech pathologist just to the private daycares. This will help with our CSA cost, which is a very disconcerting rising cost that both the county and the schools are working together to try and contain. By doing this, it will actually be a zero budget line item for the school division because we will be able to bill CSA based off of a rate sheet that we have calculated. This is a savings to CSA because we're not going to bill as much as the vendors bill. And so it's a savings to the CSA from not using an outside consultant, and it will cover our costs. So that's actually hopefully it'll be a good thing for everybody.
Can you remind us of one thing quickly, and I apologize for not keeping track of this, but the increase in electricity, I'm trying to think what our overage is currently for this year.
900 and
So we're trying to build in an additional inflation factor for next year.
that is correct.
It's okay for Susan, for me to address
Oh,
that. So when you look back and use the historical data from the last several years, our electricity costs have gone up 20% each year. So that's what we used to project this year's spending. And then that's how we got to the overage for this year. Now, that's a worst case number, and that would still be my worst case number. But when you go back and look at the actual spending for the first few months of this year compared to the first few months of last year, it's closer to 5%. So this number projecting forward for next year's budget used 20% for this year and 20% for next year. If you use 5% for this year and 5% next year, which is just based on the difference in these last 2 years, it's not consistent necessarily with historical data, but it's consistent with what we see only looking at this year. The number is much smaller than that. We can, Susan, the total number would be $4,241,000 versus whatever we have in there for the budget, which I think is $3.3 million, so it's about $900,000. So best case, there's about a $900,000 increase. Worst case, it's about $1.8 million, depending on which set of data you trust most to project forward.
And my only purpose of my question was just they were taking that into consideration in terms of covering this year's whole and additional inflationary factor.
That's right.
the last thing for people with personnel services, so currently teachers who have the National Board Certificate receive a stipend of $2,500 from the school division. They also receive a $2,500 stipend that is funded through the Virginia Department of Education. They do have a hard time attracting and retaining the psychologists, and I think they have one open, two open, three open, three open positions right now. And so the hope is that by providing a $2,500 stipend to recognize that they are national board certified, would help just attract and retain the ones that we have.
They're not all. Just one.
Yeah, we have 5 that are. So, moving into secondary instruction. So the first line item is the reduction in dual enrollment that goes with the reduction in the revenue. And then we also have a request for additional funds for music uniform cleaning and alterations of $7,250, plus an additional request for interpreting and translation costs of $5,000. And then finally, moving to CTE. As you know, we have a consultant, Kinetic, who is providing some fundraising services for them. And Mr. Searle would like to continue that contract and have $50,000 added to his budget to be able to cover that.
Speaking of that, Dr. Nicely, do we have any updates on what they've raised yet or how far they've gotten with that?
We can get another update. They're not in the raising mode yet. They're in the, reaching out. Thanks. A lot of you have participated in interviews with them, so I'm happy to have them come back and give an update.
Yeah, I'd love to know. I mean, it seems like it's been a little while since we did that.
And if I can just add, they're planning to come to a board work session and present in April.
When are they planning on actually raising some money?
That's, like Dr. Nicely said, they are helping us lay the groundwork to do that part. So this request is the possibility of keeping them on. I don't want to make that sound like it's a given, because we want to make sure that we see in April, what they bring this report to the table, what their final report is and recommendation, and whether it's going to be worth keeping them on.
But that's my point, because I mean, we've already paid them, and then we adopt a budget, pay them $50,000 more. We haven't seen $1 raised yet. I mean, it's one thing to help us out, but it's another to keep dragging this out. And
Yes,
I'm not making any accusations. I don't make
No,
that clear.
it's not a given that we would continue with them, because remember, the original purpose of hiring them was not for them to raise the money, but rather for them to help us figure out their parameters so that our staff could do the legwork.
I get a little irritated with all these consulting agencies making $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 off of us, and what are we doing with it? So we're in the middle of building this thing. Let's get the wheels rolling, and let's get some money in here so we can make sure that we're getting the right equipment and everything that we need. I mean, the time's going to fly by.
Also need to look at those contracts, the purchasing. We had that to work session.
If we could, back to slide 21 on the health insurance reserves, infusing cash of 2.2 million. That's certainly not going to be enough, as Mr. Hudson pointed out earlier. I mean, where do we get to 4.2?
I mean, we could build the premiums up. We could look at other reserves that we have on hand.
Because that's even less than we started this year with, and look where we are. I mean, it needs to be whatever our consultant recommended. We didn't listen to last year, so we better get that to a number that is twice that, I think.
You didn't listen to him last year?
We didn't listen to the consultant last year when they said 3.7 to 4.2. When we did 2.8.
Well, I'd prefer to not do it off the backs of the employees as much as possible.
Absolutely.
That's my main concern.
Yep, and again, I hate to keep throwing this up, but we're flush with cash on the other side if we need to make a request. So,
That's all.
So the last slide was just the calendar of what's coming up. We'll have crossover next week, and then on the 13th, like I've mentioned multiple times, is going to be a heavy work session. Hopefully we'll have some revenue updates. We'll look at all the compensation benefits. Health insurance will be a heavy hitter. The internal service funds kind of go hand in hand with the health insurance. We'll have the public hearing, so anyone who wants to come and speak to the effect of and provide their input on our budget is welcome to come in on February 20th. And then we'll have the final work session March 13th, and we'll present the final budget and then adopt it in March 20th. And that's it.
I'd just like to say thank you. I know you've been working on this for a long time. I really appreciate all the work you and your staff and everybody in the room here in our different divisions have tried to cut back, and appreciate that. Thank you.
Does anyone have anything else?